Third one's the charm. Okay. Hey guys, I'm back. Today I'm going to be talking with a friend of mine. His name is Damian, and we met through Instagram, and he saw my channel also. And yeah, we're going to be talking about something that it's we don't talk about too much. I mean, with what's been going on, about racism and all those things, I thought it would be interesting to start talking about racism in the LGBTQI plus community. And yeah, so I'm gonna let Damien introduce himself. So introduce yourself, Damien.
Hi everyone. Hey Raf, thank you so much for having me. So my name is Damian Joel. That's my artist name. The full name is Damian Joel Shaw, but I go by Damian Joel, or you can call me DJ. And as you said, we met through Instagram, fell in love with the content you were creating. I thought it was so thoughtful. And I was like, okay, I have to meet you, as well as you and I both spoke about my interest in just New Zealand and just the beauty of that country. But for me, I am an artist, designer, activist, writer, so many hats, based here in New York City. And I'm an immigrant by way of being a political asylee from Kingston, Jamaica. So
Mhm.
I grew up and I was born and raised in Kingston, Jamaica, and I moved to the US, I think, in 2014, September of 2014, practically fled from the homophobic persecution there.
Yeah,
Um, Here I am.
and here you are. Here you are. It's a beautiful thing. So yeah,
Yes, be
yes,
alive.
that's good. So we're going to be talking about racism in the LGBTQIA plus community, of course, together. And it's for me, it's a very interesting discussion because I've already talked about it a little bit on my channel, but
Right.
it was difficult for me to really explain how it was because I found it was a different kind of attack, and I don't know if you understand what I'm trying to say, of course, but for me it was just different. But I think it's because I was a bit naive when I was young. I thought, I would come out and go to a group where, everything would be open and, people didn't know persecution. So I wouldn't be facing with racism and, with the all LGBTQI plus community, you think, we're all one and everything. And then I realized it was a bit different than I thought it would be. So my first question, of course, is it's a bit simplistic. My questions tend to be simplistic, but I prefer being simplistic, and we can go into
Delve in. Right.
yeah. Yeah. So did you face any racism in the LGBTQI plus community?
Hmm. So my response is going to be interesting because when I moved here, I kind of saw my blackness as something sovereign and not necessarily a condition.
Mhm.
I've realized here within the U.S., blackness by virtue of the just the malaise and the sickness of systemic racism has somewhat become or seen by many as a condition, something to always have to validate and prove to say my black is beautiful, my black is this.
Yeah.
I came here with that knowledge because I came from a predominantly black country, Jamaica. So for me, I navigated this space that was New York City, never questioning why anybody may respond to me differently and that association would be with my race. But then thinking retrospectively now, I'm realizing how I was a victim of so much what I would call covert racism. It
Yeah.
wasn't necessarily blatant, it was very subtle. So yes, I would say I definitely experienced that, but it manifests in a very interesting way, in a more nefarious way, if I may say so, because just because it's not as aggressive and as overt and easily recognizable. And so it was very tricky for me to navigate once I came into an awareness of what it meant to be Black within the USA. Um, still holding on to my idea of self as being, a sovereign black cisgendered man who identified as queer, but recognizing and acknowledging that I existed now in a space that really um, was still steeped in its oppression and racism. It just shows differently. So for me, it manifested in like fetishization.
Mm.
Um, it man it manifested in this idea of ownership, um, as well as this kind of dealing with white saviorism. Because
Yeah.
again, I would go on dates, and the minute I mentioned I was, a political asylee, who fled from his country, had to leave my family behind, and I'm here, starting all over again with no money to my name. There's a difference between authentic empathy to the kind of trauma that I was trying to heal from, and how I was trying to get settled into this space. There's a difference between that kind of authentic empathy and this kind of um idea that's steeped in whiteness that shows itself in this whole sense of entitlement to your pain, and entitlement to also the idea of easing that pain. And
Mm.
I think more people, more men tend to teeter more towards that side, where they approach me from the standpoint of, I just want to take care of you, or I'm laughing as I think about it and remember some of the experiences and conversations I've had. Or they would do for me in terms of take me to dinner, um, or show me their space, as though, okay, this could be you if you acquiesce my request to access your body in a certain way. I'm just like, okay, sir,
Right.
backtrack. Don't think that just because I'm here and I'm on my face, practically facing homelessness, that I'm going to give in to you and give you access to my body in such a way because, oh, you are existing in your privilege and you feel so entitled.
Yeah.
So it was those kind of very nuanced experiences for me. It was never really blatant, except when it came to online dating, where I saw, I mean, I never really interacted with them. I just kind of swiped by them or skipped them. But going on the dating apps, you would see the preferences. And these
Yeah.
preferences again are so problematic because, one, they exist, and we can't knock somebody for having a preference. Preferences, it's a part of our human nature. We are
Yes.
attracted to what we're attracted to. But to boldly put that preference out there in a way that categorizes one as better than the other is where it becomes problematic. It's almost as though this very cold alienation of the possibility of being with somebody outside of your race um, is became this space within which they operate, and they felt very entitled to do so.
Yeah.
That's very problematic, but again, that's how their racism shows up. But
Yeah.
I find within, regrettably, and maybe I'm going off, but within the LGBTQI community, especially for gay men or queer men, we tend to almost always want to find a mirror version of ourselves.
Yeah.
And a lot of gay men end up going for what I used to jokingly call their prototype.
Yeah.
They look like a Ken doll, they want a Ken doll. And if you don't fit into that, and if you can't fit around their circle of superficial friends, then you're not considered worthy of dating. And this is why, they end up dating around. But so to have meaningful relationships, one has to come to this place of reconciling with their preferences, and deciding whether or not that preference is an unchecked bias or prejudice,
Yes.
um, or it is a true authentic preference. So yeah, that's my experience with racism in a very broad sense.
In a broad sense. It's really interesting because for me, it was covert racism, but there's
Mhm.
also a very blatant racism that happened like once or twice that made me see that, oh, okay, things are not as different as I would think it would be.
Yeah.
And just like you, I come from a country that was predominantly black. I come from Congo.
Right.
So where I left pretty young, so when I came into life, it was mostly black people. I did come from a country that was colonized, so there were a few white people here and there, but I never really, when I was young, I never really faced that kind of, I knew because my parents did study in Belgium, so they did talk to me a bit about racism and those things. So I was aware.
Mhm.
But when I got to Canada, of course I was young. I knew I was a bit different. I didn't know who I was, and once I understood who I was, it was a process of coming out, saying, okay, so I'm gay, and I told myself that's when I was like living a bit, a bit of racism here and there. So I was a bit aware. And I told myself, as I was going to come out, I was going to go in a group where they know persecution, like I told you at the beginning, and everything would be, a-okay. And then they would, I'd be invited, and, it'll be just beautiful, be amongst people who know persecution, right? And like I told you, I was wrong, right? So the first time the first time I did face racism, it was mostly I was walking with my twin brother. I did tell a story a little bit in one of my my videos, of course, vlogs. And I was walking with my twin brother, and I told him, "Oh, okay, I'm going to show you the village because in Montreal there's a place called the
They have
Village."
the
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
We
village,
have
yeah.
that here in the city.
Oh, yeah, okay. And I was walking, and as we were walking, we were about to cross the road, and there was a man. And of course, it was, a man who was, I think he may have a little bit of a problem, but I'm not too sure. I do not want to, it's
Like a
difficult.
bit of an unsound mind.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And he threw a banana at us
Mm.
and started
Oh,
acting like a
no.
monkey, right?
Yeah.
And my brother and I were super, it was like, oh, that's interesting. But as blacks, we're always taught, when that happened, just stay quiet and move on, right? So I stood quiet. Me and my brother, we stood quiet, and then as we turned around, because there were a group of gays and there were lesbians that were behind us, right? So we turned around just to show them, like, what is this,
Right.
and they were laughing too.
Mm.
So it's funny because I don't know if people were laughing because they were nervous or some were laughing also because they truly found it funny. And that was the first time I was like, oh, this is interesting. This is
Mm.
interesting. And then it came into the covert racism, like you said. And this is why I say it's very difficult to talk about racism in the LGBTQI plus community because it's mostly like you said, it's mostly covert, right?
Yeah.
And for me, well, where I would see where it was racism or lack of representation of black gay man or Asian man or and so forth, right? Was more in the shows I would see about the gay stories,
Of the
gay
gates.
coming out
Yeah.
and all those things. It was also always a particular
Excluded.
type of person, like
Mm.
two white men,
Yeah.
like Brokeback Mountain. It was such a
Mhm.
beautiful movie. I loved it and I cried at the end,
Mm.
but it was again two white gay men who are, of a certain, shape,
Yeah.
broad shoulders, kind of
They have to look, yeah,
muscular.
they have to fit the certain machismo. Yeah.
There we go, And I would see that often in movies and also, shows as queer as folk. It was white gay man and the L word basically. And then I'm gonna say I'm not gonna touch on lesbian side because we're two gay black men, so I can talk about what I know. But I would
Right.
watch also the L world. It was the same thing. It was mostly white lesbian and going out and going about in their lives.
Yeah.
And
I definitely can agree with that. I
yeah,
think I was so excited when I discovered Noah's Ark.
yeah,
Um, because I felt seen. I'm like, oh, this is possible. Okay, great. I can relate to this because it's more layered than just us,
Yes,
um, as gay people. Because as when you're the intersection of being black and gay
yeah,
is a whole different layered experience. It has way more complexities than just being, white and gay. But yes,
yeah.
go on.
Yeah, so I think for me that was mostly how I started to see how
Mhm.
racism was presented in the gay community, in the LGBTQI plus community. It was more in the lack of representation, and also when they would, when you walk in the village. And then I remember once also when I was in LA, but that was like a long time ago. I would also walk, in I think it was in West Hollywood, I think, and most people that were represented were mostly white gay men. So I would see, so it was funny for me, right? And just like you were saying, the fetishization of the black body, right?
Yeah.
And as we talk about it, I mean, we'll talk about the dating scene, right? So you touch upon it. um I remember when I was the dating scene was very difficult, was very interesting, right? Because just like you, I wouldn't, I would see those messages, pop out, and I'd be, I'll scroll down and like look for, a potential, man, and
Yeah.
some of them it was just, no blacks,
Yes.
straight up,
And
no
it's
blacks, you know?
it's there have been times I've seen that and I've been tempted to engage to ask why. because and it's not because I'm trying to posture myself, to attack anybody for their presumed preference. I just want to understand, I think, what is it about blackness or being black that kind of gives you this that I guess suggests this idea to put up a red flag where it concerns black. Like, is it no black in terms of the black aesthetic, or is it no black in terms of you have no space to deal with the black trauma that reminds you of your privilege and your entitlement? You
Mm,
see, so there are questions that I want to ask where that's concerned whenever I see that, because in a lot of ways I think it's the latter. I think it's their refusal to face their privilege and their entitlement, and being with a black person
yeah,
puts you in a space to kind of reckon with, how you exist in this world from a space of privilege, and entitlement. And then when you have to reckon with that, then that makes you uncomfortable. And so I
yeah,
think a lot of these white men who decidedly say no black, it's their way of escaping, and staying in the veil of their supremacy, or this delusion rather of supremacy, um, and not dealing with the real stuff.
yeah,
Because for me, I'm in an interracial relationship,
yes,
um, currently married to a white man, and that has been, I think, and we both kind of bonded on that too, on that term. So much of the work within our marriage has been unpacking that stuff, the,
yes,
the tough conversations around how you are able to, as a white man, walk into certain spaces and not have to worry about perhaps being attacked, or not have to worry about, your gayness being a problem.
yes,
There, for us, we are already in this, pushed aside in this peripheral community as of being black in this in a lot of spaces, because whiteness seems to be the superseding standard, even
mm,
even in spaces where they are not the majority. From a demographic standpoint, they still seem to hold the majority in our headspace. and
yes,
and conditioning is something that we are trying to heal from, and dealing with, so much of what has happened to us historically, but also what we have to be dealing with now. As you mentioned, the representation feeds us constantly this idea of us being anomalies and us not necessarily feeling as though there's a space for us. And that does something to somebody. And so
Yeah.
if it is that you're seeking to date someone, you can't date necessarily from this standpoint. I believe from the standpoint of upholding your comfort, but rather
Yeah.
date from this space of empathy and recognizing that within the context of that relationship, it's going to require a lot of work and tough conversations to deal with the daily trauma that people that look like you and I have to navigate.
Yes.
But a lot of people I think that leads to the overarching problem within the LGBTQIA plus community, especially for gay men, gay white men. Relationships tend to be a do as you please, a kind of they evade the idea of relationships. And while that's a bigger conversation to be had in terms of, this idea of being married and how heteronormative it is and how it's steeped in certain patriarchal traditions, that
Mm.
may be true. But as human beings, though, we are called to be kinder to each other. We are called to develop long relationships and sustain them. And so I think in a lot of ways, people step in and out of relationships because they don't want to confront their own mess. And so the minute there's an issue, then it becomes okay, I'm done. This is too much for me because I feel as though it's a byproduct of us facing this external trauma of existing in this world that tells us that being gay is an issue or is a sickness or whatever it is, depending on where you come from, because I've heard it all and I'm sure you've heard it
Yeah.
all too. So we're already dealing with the heaviness of that, and I think somehow we seem to come into relationships trying to escape from
Yes.
from the external world. And a lot of these so-called relationships end up starting from this place of trauma bonding. um
Yes.
and so it yeah, it's a layered conversation, but really I feel a lot of these white men who decidedly say they don't want to date a black person, it's their own fear of having to deal with themselves, of having to reckon with, and it's it's so complex because it has to do with them personally, it has to do with their social circle and how they will continue to hold space for you amongst their friends who may be problematic. It has to do with their family and how they may be called to hold space for you within their family who may be problematic and racist.
Yeah.
There's just so many complexities to it, and I think they shy away from it and so end up in relationships where they're bonding on the basis of their fear of not dealing with themselves.
Yes. And it's interesting when we talk about trauma, right? Because like I think what's interesting when you look at, well, you were saying earlier about, being black, gay, and not being black, gay, and effeminate, as they say,
Ooh,
it,
layer, yeah.
it's a different layer. Because me too, I'm a bit, I'm a bit effeminate, at some point,
Yeah,
Okay.
and you
I'm
remind me
effeminate.
so much of me because we do like flow in between the
Yes.
feminist. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was interesting because like also the thing that I would see also was, no black, no feminine,
Um,
no feminine man or
mask
whatever they
for
would
mask.
say. Yes, the mask. And it was interesting 'cause I was just like, whoa, there's so much trauma, right, in
Mhm.
the already in the LGBTQIA plus
Yeah,
community that we have to deal with, just like you said. But on top of that, as black men, we also have to deal with, and not just black men, also black women in the LGBTQI plus community. We have to face this racism, right? Because we were talking, I'm married to a white man too, and just on the base of, because we're not talking about racism, I would go to I went to Thailand,
yeah.
beautiful country, and people are super kind, and I loved it, right? But I remember when I was in Bangkok, as I would walk, my husband had a different experience than I had.
Or
Just just as we were walking, right?
Yeah.
The stairs, some people would like look at me, go like this, and then start laughing, all
Mm.
those things,
Wow.
So it's interesting because like there's like a different kind of trauma. And then when I would have discussion about racism with another person from the LGBTQIA plus community, they would say, we're all in this together. We're facing the same issue all together. And that's why sometimes I would be, are we seeing the same things?
They're looking at it through their own lens. They completely miss the mark every time they say that. Yeah.
Yes, you miss the mark, right? And I would try and say, well, I think it's without being too, this is racism all the time, right? And if I want to say that, I
Yeah.
should say it, right? But I think I've been told not to always say racism because I don't know. I think
Yeah,
in the world,
the block goes up and the ego starts centering itself, and they're like, "No, I'm not racist." Like, well, you're not being actively anti-racist either,
so
but
yeah. So it's
yeah.
just it's very interesting, right? And that's why, like I've always said, being racism, the way racism is presented in the LGBTQIA plus community is just it's very covert. And sometimes um I'd go, for example, drag race, right? And I would see things, just like, the way people would I don't know if I should go there, but not just drag, but just the drag world. The way some of the white drags can
Just
jump.
cancel.
Yes,
Yeah. Afterward, yep, career just blows up.
blows up, and but it blows up by imitating. I don't know if the word is imitating, but I'm trying to find the word.
Appropriating the certain black cultures and black icons.
Yeah, black icons, and also especially imitating is appropriating Black Americans.
Yeah.
The way they talk, exaggerating the way they present themselves, and it's just like just the move of the head, or just like
Yeah.
just like the way they do it. And
It,
sometimes it's just
it's so funny to me. It's interesting that you brought that up because you're spot on where you just to bring that to the conversation because when you think about it, so much of who we are naturally as a people, and I mean, while I will never see blackness as just something that's monolithic, we're so varied in our
yeah,
expressions, but there are certain things though that really especially are steeped in for me just US, American black experiences and black expression. For instance, as you said, like this idea of like the snap and the neck and all that stuff.
yes,
And what's so interesting is we've been pushed aside and almost bastardized for these expressions. And the minute it gets dubbed as worthy and cool or trendy by somebody who doesn't look like us, then now it's okay. Then
yes,
it gets the pass to make it into mainstream to use the kind of language
mm,
of or tone or some kind of linguistic styling that is typically left and owned and authored by black folks, but then somehow they've taken it on and whitewashed it and it's okay. And
yeah,
the very nature of that is it it speaks to the deep rooted problem of racism and how so many of us um, r just refuse to pay attention to it. Because here's the thing. The difference for me is I come from a culture where we would have white tourists coming to Jamaica and we
mm,
would give them cornrows, right? And we'd give them braids. And we didn't see it as cultural appropriation because for us, we existed in a space where our culture was dominant and
yeah,
was never pushed aside or told it wasn't worthy. So for us, when we offer access to a white person to partake in the styling of the hair, that's something that we don't take lightly, but
Yeah,
we do it, and then we let it go. We remove ourselves from it. But when you exist within the American reality, though, where for decades, centuries even, so much of who they are has been mocked in media, has been shown as minstrels or characters worthy of laughing at, to then now be in a space where you as a white person is able to just to jump into the skin of it,
yeah,
or not even jump into the skin, to tap into the essence of blackness but never fully inhabit the
yeah,
complexities of what comes with that, because
yes,
you will always hold on to your whiteness and your privilege and your entitlement. You won't give that up, but you will tap into the thing that is cool and trendy now.
yes,
And that is, to me, where it becomes problematic. And so moving here, I've had to open my eyes, coming from the Jamaican perspective, where we allowed tourists, as I said, to braid their hair, and we would do the braiding for them, to now coming to this space where I see it head on. I'm living in it and existing within it, surviving it. um I'm recognizing how problematic it is, and it's a conversation that needs to be had. It requires a bit of calling out. It also requires some calling into conversation, because
yes,
I often believe in just calling people out for the sake of being mean, but really calling people into conversation about just how they take up space, and whenever they do occupy such space, and to pay homage to
yes,
to the black people who inspire you, to do due diligence, to show respect and regard for this thing that really is rooted in so much of our survival, um, through through enslavement. I mean, when you think about cornrows and the stylings of cornrow,
mm,
not only does it come from a lot of West African tribes, but also it was used during the periods of enslavement as a way of creatively mapping routes and and
yes,
and communicating with each other. When you understand the relevance and the significance, rather, of that, how then do you just hop into it and just dismiss its power as just, oh, it's just a style, it's whatever, y'all are too y'all just make everything about race. Not everything is about race.
yeah,
When you don't inhabit a body, you can't speak on it. And which this is why it's important, even for me as a cisgendered male, to be mindful of how much space I take up when I
yeah,
enter into rooms where there are women speaking about their issues and their trauma, um, to not take up space and almost diminish their experience by doing so, because it's important to listen, and it's important to be uncomfortable at times, because it's in that discomfort that's when growth begins.
yes.
So you hit the nail on the head with that for sure. And it's funny as though I'm not that type of gay, though. I really don't watch Drag Race, and it's surprising to so many people. It really is surprising, because every time they're like, "You don't watch Drag Race?" I'm like, "No, I really don't."
Because
Yeah, and
I used
I
to
had
watch,
to, when I moved here, I was slightly afraid of drag queens
yeah,
because they were so larger than life, and I'm a bit of an introvert. That whenever I remember I went to a bar once, and when one came over and she was dancing and doing the most, I'm like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my. Yeah, but no, no, no. I think they're absolutely fascinating. I think they possess a particular type of superpower. But coming from a country where I wasn't necessarily as exposed to them, I met them with a bit of, oh my God, this is a lot. And no, 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 I thoroughly enjoy the just the work that they do and how significant it is. But I'm still not a huge fan of Drag Race. I just can't deal with the messiness and the cattiness. It becomes too much.
I know it becomes too much. Yeah, I used to watch it, but I'm like, no, now I'm like, but it's kind of funny sometimes to watch it, but
Yeah, I've seen
but
clips and I've
I see
laughed
the
at some of the
problematics. Sorry?
clips. Yeah.
Yeah,
No, I
so
said
yeah,
I've seen clips and I've laughed at some of the clips.
yeah. But yeah, but I'm happy that we talked about it because now because I feel that sometimes when we talk about racism, in the LGBT, I keep on saying this, in the LGBTQIA plus community, it's always through the lens of dating, right? And it's
Yeah.
important because I feel like we've touched on, the experiences, and we've talked about, dating, and we've talked about,
Yeah.
representation, or, appropriation of
Yeah.
some of
And I'm
fellow.
happy, I'm really happy that you brought the conversation there because it's important for us to, I think we have a responsibility, you and I, to ensure that those who are listening, who may not understand, who may
Yes,
be coming into this, not being a part of the LGBTQI plus community, to realize that we are more than the kind of sex that we have. We're more than our intimacy. Um, to really humanize who we are. Because
yes,
I find I get concerned a lot of the times when the minute you hear of a gay, you think sex, you think something that has to do with a private encounter and not the totality of the person,
yes,
their experiences. And to be queer, to be gay or trans is such a layered and complex experience that goes beyond dressing a certain way. We don't all dress a particular way. We don't all, fit into this mold or this box or this stereotype. I have my moments where I decide to queen it up or femme it up if I feel like it. But I'm also very much a man and I'm okay with being a man and
yeah,
identifying as such. There are those of us who identify as non-binary, and there's room to respect that, and there's politics within our existence on so many levels, or just existing our existence as being black, as being queer, in some cases being gender non-conforming is an act of being radical, because we
yeah.
exist in a world that constantly tells us that we shouldn't exist and constantly wants us to fit into molds. And so it's very important that the conversations we have are not just limited to dating, because we exist in the wider world and we
No,
have full lives. Yeah.
that's perfectly said. I mean, it's perfectly said. And do you do you think, one last question, do you think that because I'm starting to see that the LGBTQI plus community is starting to slowly open up that discussion of racism, right? Unless I'm wrong. I may be wrong, you tell me,
No,
I'm starting to see
it's opening up, but in small groups, small areas, like maybe in New York City, but the rest of the country
yeah.
is catch up, or the world.
Because also in New Zealand, it's interesting because in New Zealand they're really discussing racism, in the LGBTQI plus community.
Oh,
It's very slow, you
you're right.
know, but it's happening,
Yeah.
and you know, I want to be
Hopeful.
positive.
Right.
That it could really open up the discussion, really have an honest discussion. Because I do, like I said before, I do believe that when we talk about racism in the LGBTQI plus community, it becomes interesting because they always want to bring it to the preference, and I
Yeah.
sometimes wonder if by only talking it through the preference, it gives them a way to get away of
Mhm.
the things they may have said or they may have done that isn't linked to preference, or that they use preference to hide
Oh yeah.
racism. And it's interesting. So I just want
It's
to think there is a change.
if
Sorry.
I believe there's going to be change. Um, I just like you, I'd like to be hopeful, but again, healing takes time.
Yes.
And I think a lot of us need to heal before we even try to get into a space of being with somebody where we truly can't hold space for their trauma because we have yet to deal with our own trauma.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think it's so important. One of the things that I had here, I made some notes before I came into the conversation, was to talk about how, and I'm very delicately trying to string my words together. What I've realized, even within the Black community, the
Yes.
preference, the preference. the Black gay community rather, specifically the preference to date a particular type of person
mm,
that resembles or has proximity to whiteness by way of access or wealth. Um, you know, I know I may be stepping on toes when I say this, but
mm.
these are real conversations to have with self first, to
Yes.
question and interrogate why exactly am I doing this? Why exactly am I choosing this person as my partner? Because the reality is, if you're doing it because it looks good on the outside, because it should make sense, you know, it should make sense that if you're a Harvard grad and you worked so hard to infiltrate these spaces that were predominantly, you know, held by white folks, to then aspire to have a partner that is of that particular ilk
Mm,
is a question to be had, to be asked. You know, are you seeking to level up and to power up, and so your partner needs to be that, so that then when you occupy these spaces that you have to navigate, whether it be through work or whatever, where they're predominantly white folks, you don't feel embarrassed by this person who doesn't, you know, who
yeah.
can't operate and perform this kind of respectability politics that you exist within.
Yeah.
These are the questions to ask ourselves. And again, I'm not knocking anybody who you know seeks somebody who is on their level. But being
Yeah.
on your level doesn't mean having the same level of education per se, but rather a particular outlook on life.
Yes.
Um, and we have to hold space for our siblings who may have been disadvantaged. And as a Black person, I think we have a greater responsibility to not perpetuate the trauma, to not perpetuate the kind of exclusivity that whiteness has taught us, that listen, education separates you from the rest of the pack. You know, career success separates you from the rest of the pack, and so you scoff at anybody who is lower than you at that level. You know, but
Yeah.
the reality is, these persons and these individuals, their existence is still valid. And if you're choosing to date in such a way, then great. But question it. I really urge people to question. I question my choice in terms of my partner.
Yes.
And we had these conversations where we question, okay, on what basis did we come into this? What was it about you that perhaps I thought I couldn't find in somebody who was of my ethnicity? And there's validity in that. I know I couldn't hold space for certain trauma because
Yeah.
I'm trying to heal. And so while I'm doing the healing work, I can hold space for somebody who is also doing the healing work. But a
Yeah.
lot of my Black brothers, particularly, are not doing the work to heal. They are operating from ego. They are operating from this idea of where even how they are in public is very heteronormative, and you have to fit into this thing. They're operating from their own homophobic trauma.
Yes.
You know, what they've experienced, they become it. They become the person who demands that you act a particular way so that they can feel comfortable walking in public spaces, so that no eyes will be on them, so that people will look on and say, oh, they're just two friends. And you can be okay and be comfortable with that. You're
Yeah.
still operating from the place of fear, and not necessarily from a place of being fully, unapologetically, authentically you, and owning
Definitely.
that, so that you can make space for true love to come in. Um, but yeah, I'm sure that was a whole lot of to digest for some folks, but I'm sure you get it, Raf. I'm
Oh,
absolutely sure you
yeah.
understand it.
Honestly, I understand what you're trying to say. I'm sure not what you're trying to say. I understand what you are saying. I'm sorry, not trying. What you are saying, I understand. And yeah. So honestly, this has been a very interesting discussion. I wish
Mm,
we could go on
so
and on and on, but there's so many things to say. If we could do a part
yes,
two, maybe it'd be nice because I think there's so many things to touch on, especially
yeah.
if we talk about the I don't know if it's the right word. So anybody who hear that, I'm sorry. The self-hate that
Mhm.
we have as gay Black men, and
Yeah.
how we navigate in this world, you know. And
Mhm.
yeah, like we could have a part two one day if it's possible, you see. And yeah, so guys, I think this is the end of this. The discussion was interesting. I'm happy to come, Damien, and talk to me. It was
Yes,
wonderful to finally meet.
thank you for
And
having me.
if you guys love the discussion, like, comment, and subscribe. And have a wonderful day, morning, evening, wherever you are. And bye, guys. Say bye, Damien. There you go. And then let's stop the recording. Do that.